Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to our series this blessed month of Ramadan and our Ramadan Reflections for 2025. The soul's path home, divine wisdom on death and beyond, where we continue to reflect on the stages of life and death from the perspective of the Quran and the teachings given to us from the Ahlul Bayt. May God's peace and blessings be upon all of them. In today's episode, let me start by reminding us all that we have now crossed the threshold of the midway point of the month of Ramadan. Today being the 16th day, we continue in this blessed month of Ramadan and passing the halfway point. We continue in our discussion of delving into that final journey of the deceased and the preliminaries that must be done before the burial. Now, at the moment when the believer has passed, as we talked about 2 days ago, the soul begins the official process, if we want to call it that, of its journey toward the afterlife. However, that physical body is still with us, and as such, we have been obligated to perform a series of rites to allow it to be in a form of transition. We have to realize, brothers and sisters, that the rites of death in Islam are not mere formalities. They carry profound significance for us, more importantly, for the living. They're meant, yes, to honor the deceased and remind the living of the ultimate reality of death and the inevitable return to Allah. Now, in our previous sessions, we spoke about the ghusl, the kafan, the hunut. These are all obligations that must be performed for every Muslim that passes away. Well, after completing those actions, ensuring that the body has been prepared to be buried, we perform one of the most important actions and another obligation, the funeral prayer, also known as Salat al-Mayyit or Salat al-Janazah, a rite for every believer of any age. Now, in the Islamic rulings of His Eminence, Ayatullah Seestani, he does note the following. He says that it is obligatory to perform the funeral prayer, Salat al-Mayyit, for a deceased Muslim or a child who is considered as a Muslim and has completed 6 lunar years of age. He goes on to mention, His Eminence Ayatullah Seestani, that as a precautionary obligation, that is, it's necessary to perform the funeral prayer for a child who has not completed 6 years lunar, but understood the concept of prayer. He goes on to say that if the child did not understand prayer, there is no problem in performing the funeral prayer with the hope of divine reward. However, he says it is not recommended, there's no recommendation to perform the funeral prayer for a stillborn child. Now, one point to reflect upon as we move on is that it is interesting that when a child is born, we recite the Adhan in the right ear and then the Iqamah in the left ear. However, after that, there's no Salat to be performed. We fast forward to the death of that believer. And as we're about to perform the Salat al-Mayyit, we do so, but there is no Adhan nor Iqamah. Even if they lived 100 years in between their coming into this world and their departing the world, we don't repeat the Adhan and Iqamah for the funeral prayer. Why is that? I thought every prayer had the Adhan or Iqamah. It's as if their birth and the act of the Adhan and Iqamah done when they were initiated into this world was the start of their life of worship of the one true God, Allah. And at the end, their death is the culmination of a life of servitude and worship to Allah. And that gap in the middle, which was their lifespan obviously, was something so short that it didn't require another Adhan or Iqamah. Now, after the ghusl and the shrouding, the body is then taken to the appropriate place where the funeral prayers are performed, traditionally in the house of worship. Now, this very brief prayer is extremely important, and the wordings that we are taught to say are very thought-provoking. As we have been taught, there are 5 takbirs, that is saying of Allahu Akbar. And between each of the 2 takbirs is a short supplication to be recited. So we have 4 supplications and 5 takbirs. Now in this salat, there are multiple things which we will perform and which we say. We supplicate for the forgiveness of the deceased soul, asking Allah to grant them peace and elevate their status in the hereafter, and much more. However, before we go into an analysis on a line or 2 of the Salat al-Mayyit, I want to review just one hadith with respect to this obligatory prayer. We're told in the books of hadith that a group of Jews once came to the Messenger of Allah, may Allah bless him and his family, and asked him various questions. The Prophet replied to them and said the following, that any time a believer prays over a deceased person, Allah makes paradise obligatory on that individual as long as that person, that is the one who recites the Salat al-Mayyit, was not a hypocrite, nor one who broke off ties with his parents. Because in these instances, Salat al-Mayyit with all of its benefits and rewards would be of no use to that individual. So the funeral prayer is not just something that we do to bid the deceased farewell, to say adios, to say goodbye. It has immense benefit for the person performing it. Yet another reason to ensure that we do our best to take part in every funeral we can, as much as possible. Now let me go back to that funeral prayer and look at one portion. As I said, that this salat contains 5 takbirs and 4 supplications. I want us to reflect on just one portion of one of the du'as, one of the supplications we say in the funeral prayer, and the power behind it. We say, after we do the takbir, we say, "O Allah, indeed this person laid before us is your servant, and the son or daughter of your servant, and the son or daughter of your maid servant. He or she has come to you, and you are the best to whom one can come. O Allah, we do not know of him or her anything except good, and you know him or her better than we do. O Allah, if he or she was a doer of good, then increase his or her good deeds. And if he or she was a wrongdoer, then overlook his or her misdeeds and forgive him or her. O Allah, place him or her with you in the highest of the high places, and take care of his or her family among those left behind. And have mercy upon him or her by your mercy, O most merciful of those who show mercy." Now, before moving on, one religious ruling on the funeral prayer stands out. Ayatullah Seestani says that, according to some of the jurists, may Allah be pleased with them, it is considered disliked, makruh, to perform the funeral prayer multiple times for a deceased person. However, he says this opinion is not definitively established. Therefore, His Eminence Ayatullah Seestani goes on to say, it's permissible to perform the funeral prayer multiple times for a deceased person. If the deceased was a person of knowledge, a scholar, and a person of piety, of taqwa, then there is no doubt that performing multiple funeral prayers is not disliked. Now, coming back to the subject, this supplication which I just went through from the funeral prayer offers several important insights about death and our relationship with the divine and what we proclaim in this prayer. I want to give you just 3 key takeaways to reflect upon today. Point number 1 is humility and recognition of divine knowledge. This prayer acknowledges that Allah knows the deceased better than we do, even if we lived with him our entire lives. This reminds us to be humble in our judgment of others, especially after their death. It emphasizes that only Allah has complete knowledge of a person's deeds, intentions, and their inner state. Point number 2 is hope for the divine mercy. The supplication then asks for forgiveness and an increase in good deeds for the deceased, regardless of what we know of their earthly actions. This reflects the Islamic principle of hope in Allah's mercy even after death. And it encourages believers to maintain a positive outlook and to pray for the best for those who have passed away. Point number 3 is a concern for the living. Yes, we're at a funeral, remembering the deceased, but we'll notice that this prayer included a request for Allah to take care of the deceased's family. This highlights the importance of community support and remembering those left behind by the departed. It reminds us that death affects not just the individual who died, but also their loved ones who continue to live and grieve and mourn, and we owe it to them to comfort and console them as well. Let's now move on to one of the final stages, the burial. Now, we're not going to be able to go through all of that, what we wanted to mention about the burial in today's video, so do stay tuned for tomorrow's finale to the burial, in which we'll wrap up this important discussion. In Islam, the burial of a deceased Muslim is a solemn and spiritually significant event which the entire community is highly encouraged to participate in. It's not only a blessing for the deceased to have, hundreds or thousands of people at their funeral. It will help provide, however, comfort and consolation to the family and the friends. But lastly, it becomes a learning lesson and a powerful time for reflection on the transient nature of worldly life for those at that funeral. In fact, we have a direct hadith about this same topic from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq, may God's peace and blessings be upon both of them, in which he has reported to have said, when you carry a funeral bier, when you carry that casket, be as if you are the one being carried, and as if you had asked your Lord to return to this world, and He granted your request. Then consider what you would do anew. This profound statement encourages deep reflection on mortality and how one lives their life. It should give us reflection that participating in a funeral should remind us of our own mortality and inspire us to live as if we have been given a second chance at life, encouraging righteous actions and self-improvement. Now tomorrow in our next episode, we will continue and conclude with our theme of the funeral rites and the burial. Until then, may Allah guide us all, protect us all, and grant all of us patience whenever we hear of death, whether from a family member, a friend, a community member, or a total stranger. Until tomorrow, brothers and sisters, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.